Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Presence Posse. We are presenting the topic Transcending Suffering. Transcending Suffering. And with me today, I have Danielle McMahon, Bobby Cobb, and Dr. Fred Blum, and I'm Miriam Siegel. Today we are making up the Presence Posse. So, before we dive into the theme, I'm just wondering if any of you is suffering right now. But I might make you suffer by asking you to present yourselves. So how about if I start with you, Danielle? How would you like to say something about yourself and perhaps anything that is related to the topic?
Okay. I am Danielle McMahon. I am a people whisperer or a personal peace coach. And I have an idea about what it means to suffer. But I'm interested in hearing everyone else's idea.
Okay, then. Now I have to kind of do eeny, meeny, miny, moe. You and Bobby and Fred are beside.
Take Fred.
You know what? I'm doing depending on what side he's on. I'm actually sort of mesmerized by the lotus flower behind you, Bobby. So I'm going to go with you first.
Okay, and you can be.
And is that Zula?
Zula!
Yeah, the new puppy.
Her first appearance.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so I'm Bobby Cobb. I'm a liberation hypnotist and obviously a new puppy owner. I work with individuals and organizations and help them really understand what the source of happiness and fulfillment and clarity is. It's not what I call the prime misunderstanding. We are conditioned to believe that our happiness and our achievement and our wisdom all come from outside of us. We're conditioned to look externally for solutions to the problems that we face. And I help people understand that they need to make a legal U-turn at the next opportunity and look within instead of without. And I'm glad to be here today. I love our weekly little chats.
And it is lovely to have you as always. Dr. Fred.
Hey, I love that legal U-turn. Dr. Fred Blum. I call myself a self-inquiry coach. And this interesting idea about suffering. What is suffering? And what might be the solution to suffering that we seek? Perhaps it's not as difficult as we may, have been taught to believe.
I love that because you always simplify things. Now I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Me too.
And how many steps you're going to break this down into if there's more than two. I love that. So lastly, I'm Miriam Siegel, and I am a compassionate, I don't mess around psychotherapist.
A new designation.
They don't seem like things that go together, but they actually are. But I don't think anybody's really going to get anywhere basing themselves on excuses. So I meet your excuses with compassion, and I help guide you to not needing them anymore. And that's also part of transcending suffering, is not having to stay in. The excuses will keep us in our suffering. They tend to do that. So with compassion and a fair bit of might, we can move out of that. So that's where I am. So transcending suffering. We can start with Happy Monday. That's very nice. Thank you very much for that. I don't know who you are because it just says Facebook user, but it's very nice of you to wish us well. We are. One of the things I put in the actual information post about today's talk was the difference between transcending suffering and denying suffering, transcending and avoiding. Because And sometimes people talk about spiritual bypassing and that sort of thing. And it's always sort of that indication that you're always supposed to be happy, or you're supposed to be above your feelings and not really go into your feelings and that sort of thing. And that's not the impression I have of what we're going to be talking about, or how any of us really deals with feelings. Although, Danielle, you have a very concrete system or approach to changing from one feeling to another. As far as I understand, you can choose what feeling you have. And I'm kind of curious when it comes to the theme that we have, transcending suffering, if you would like to tell us a bit about that, this sort of being able to change your feelings, if I've understood you correctly. Okay, we have no sound on you. You seem to be muted.
I did, because I'm using my phone as a hotspot. I used up my other one and it was making noise. So
Yes.
sorry about that. So the definition of suffering that I accept, that I like, that I read, is from M. Scott Peck in The Road Less Traveled. And it says that suffering is the avoidance of legitimate pain. So if you are willing to face legitimate pain and walk through that feeling, any intense emotion that's not judged and it's not resisted only can really hold its momentum for about 15 minutes. So I have one friend in particular who, in utilizing the system that we call instant freedom technique, actually writes lines. She sets the timer and she writes lines like she was in school. I am feeling pain and I love and accept myself anyway. And she will write those lines so that she's not in resistance and she's not in judgment, and she's just allowing that emotion either until it subsides or until the timer goes off. So that's how she began this particular technique, is she had to write it down. She had to have a physical activity to allow her to stay in non-judgment, to allow her to stay in the emotion, and to allow her just to experience the emotion, because we are very conditioned for negative emotions, to avoid them, to suppress them, to do anything but feel them, which would actually allow them to move and change, right? So at that point, then you can spend a moment in silence, in a blank space, and choose what emotion you would like to feel instead. And using the feeling wheel, which is part of the technique, you can choose the one that's the same vibrational match. For anger, the vibrational match, I believe, is power. So if you go from pain, I'm not sure what is directly, excuse me, across it on the feeling wheel, but I have that tool that I could pull up and say, okay, this is the feeling I'm feeling. Where is it? And what's a vibrational match? What would I rather choose? What would I rather feel? And then I can choose to feel into that. But if I don't feel the original pain, then I'm going to end up suffering with it. And you can Google the feeling wheel. There's all kinds of them.
But that's actually, I think that's a really good point, an important point. It's if you don't actually feel the feeling you have, that can cause you some problems. And this is, I'm just going to bring in, because I actually really like Eckhart Tolle. Or I think some people say Eckhart Tolle, because he doesn't talk about not feeling feelings, but he's more about being, not going into, not letting the feeling define you, not going into the feelings and live as if the feelings are telling you what's true or not. And I think this is where this sort of idea of transcending suffering and spirituality gets confused, because he doesn't actually say, don't feel the feeling. That's not what he's talking about when he talks about being present, when he talks about being the witness and observing and being aware. He's not talking about not feeling. He's talking about being with feelings, but not buying into them as being the truth about who you are and what the world is about and what your life is about. And I'm noticing you're nodding a lot, Bobby, so I'm going to go to you. What would you like to say about that?
Yeah, and to just kind of build on your Eckhart quote there, I think the suffering really occurs when we identify or overly identify with whatever pain it is that we are experiencing. And this, this conversation, when it comes up in coaching about transcending suffering or just talking about suffering in general, often gets people to go, wait a second, are you saying that if, my child were to die, I wouldn't be in pain? And I don't think that's what any of us are saying at all. But there is a difference between experiencing pain and suffering. And the way that I think of suffering is suffering becomes when we cling or get overly attached to a specific outcome, a specific idea of the way that we would like the world to unfold. And we become frustrated, angry, depressed, have angst, we're anxious, or whatever label that we want to put on, because there is a difference between the way the world is unfolding and the way that we would like it to unfold. And if you were on here earlier, my puppy made a brief appearance. My new puppy, I had to put my old one down, my old dog who was 15, about 2 months ago, and I was in an enormous amount of pain for several days after that. But I really wasn't suffering. I dove into the pain. I fully just experienced it. Tears were coming. I let them flow, and I just tried to bend back to the concept of, man, what a blessing it was that this dog was in my life for 14 years, and I had such a powerful bond with her that it hurts this much, and just really sitting with that. And I needed to remind myself frequently that I actually wasn't in pain, but pain was arising inside of awareness, inside of me. And as we begin to de-link those two, I think a lot of the suffering part begins to melt away. And I'll stop there, and that may be a good catalyst for additional conversation, or I'm sure you guys have got a little something to add to that, or whatever shows up for you.
Well, you're sharing some valuable points. Thank you very much. And I noticed Fred sitting there looking very serious, but not quite. You never really look completely. So very little smile behind there. So now I'm really, okay, nice try. It just now that looks like you're suffering.
Just trying to make you right.
Anybody, do you want to comment on Bobby, Danielle, me, or just bring in your own stuff, because you've got lots of good stuff?
Well, I mean, I think I align with everything that I'm hearing everyone say. There, the fundamental thing, which I think we all clearly agree on, is transcending suffering. I mean, transcending is a very well chosen word, right? Because it doesn't mean eliminating suffering or avoiding suffering or anything like that. It means, is there something beyond suffering? Or even, the old almost cliche, the only way out is through. So we because I have this crazy idea that all experience is neutral, or in essence, all experience therefore is equivalent. And then we add a meaning to it. We give some kind of power to that experience that it doesn't intrinsically have. Now, that again, because I know some people love to go to extremes. So they say all experience. So you're saying, like Bobby mentions, my child dying is the same as me getting a stain on my shirt. in the relative sense, no, of course not. You know, in the relative sense, one feels much more deeply wounding and painful than the other. But that's because of the attachment, as Bobby pointed out, that we build up, you know? Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't feel more pain when a dog or a child, you know, or something like that happens, then you get a spot on your shirt. But when we begin to see, when we could begin to come back to the root, which is that it's an experience, we're having an experience. And part of that experience may be a lot of pain, which just reveals our attachment. And we could say, okay, so I'm going to allow this pain to cleanse me, to allow me to transcend by seeing that I am who I really am is bigger than all of this. I'm bigger than the pain or the attachment or the experience itself. And so we go to a place where we can observe ourselves going through all of this without necessarily getting sucked into it, which is really what suffering is, right? It's the becoming identified. It's becoming so deeply identified with the pain that we don't see anything but the pain, which can be very difficult, of course. And I'm sure, you know, we've all had moments of that in our lives.
Yes, I would believe so. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to bring in a couple of examples that I experienced the last month because I was quite fascinated by them. Just a few weeks ago, I was going to get on the bus and I put my arm, because I have to go up. So I put my arm out first to get on the bus and the door's closed. Now this is the back door. And it's still, you know, we can't go on the front of the bus because of the COVID regulations. So I'm getting in the back of the bus. The doors close on my arm. And I thought, well, I'll just pull my arm out. Or the doors would open, but they didn't. So I tried to pull my arm out and it was stuck in the doors. They're, you know, rubbery things. And those doors were not moving. And I just stood and I leaned back and I just called out, and I'll do it just what I did, but not as loud. I went, help. Yeah, not like, ah! It was just get the drivers. I mean, my brain just went, yeah, okay, I guess I just have to get the bus driver's attention. So I just kind of went, loud enough for him to hear, most likely. There's lots of people around. I was interested watching lots of people running like mad to the front of the bus to get the bus driver's attention, to get him to open the doors, which he did. And then I got on laughing, sat down, forgot the whole thing. And then when I got off the bus and went into the shop just to get myself something to drink, somebody behind me asked, how's your arm? And I turned around and I was like, my arm? I'd forgotten completely about it. And then I went, oh yeah, you were there. And I went, oh yeah, no, it wasn't a problem. It was nothing dangerous. My arm is fine. And she went, yes, it was. And I thought, okay, here's two really different perspectives of experiences of the same situation, where I was standing with my arm locked in the doors and the bus was not moving. Had it started moving, I would have done something more, like maybe slam my arm or something, or scream help a lot louder or whatever. But the bus was not moving yet. My arm was in the door. I knew I wasn't in danger. So I wasn't scared at all. No pain involved at all. And then the doors opened. I got on the bus and forgot it, because to me, it wasn't a problem. But her experience of it was like, oh, you could have been injured. You could have been, yeah, a lot of things could have happened, but none of them were happening. And none of them did happen. So I don't have to carry that with me and I don't have to suffer. The other example is just last week, where I was in the shop to buy some food. And when I went to pay, I didn't have my Visa card was suddenly not in my wallet suddenly. And so fortunately I have more than one. So I paid with another one. And I was standing going, where's my Visa card? And I thought, well, okay, if it's not there where it's supposed to be, if it's not in my purse, I can call Visa and have them, stop the card or whatever it's called. And then I thought back, yeah, I think I know what happened. I took it out to pay something. I put it with my cell phone. It's probably still in that little pouch that I had my cell phone in. So I'll wait. I'll check my account when I get home. If there's unusual activity, I'll block the card. If not, I'll just wait till tomorrow. I'll go to work, look for the card, and if it's probably there. It could have fallen out, but I mean, I can check. And then again, I forgot about it, woke up in the morning like anything else. And then on my way to work, I remembered, oh yeah, I remember to check the pouch. And there it was. No fear, no pain, no nothing, because nothing was happening. No danger, no catastrophe, because I didn't have to make it into that. All I had to do was look at what was. And what was not a problem. Whereas before, I would have gone into full panic. Oh my God, my card. And I probably would have to rush back to work that evening. It takes an hour to get there practically, just to get the card and come home again. It was completely unnecessary. I slept well, no problem. So I just wanted to bring that kind of example in because it shows to me how far I've come, but also it shows what can happen and how suffering does not have to take place. If we don't make something into something, it isn't. And that is one of my perspectives of transcending suffering.
But, you know, I'll add to that, but I wanted to add to that, you know, every experience, like, so if let's say you had a different response to that experience, maybe you got upset or nervous about your Visa card or the bus, you know, trying to steal your arm. It was unsuccessful. We're happy.
Greedy bus driver, yeah.
If we stay present, because we're always like calibrating our past experiences, then we get to assess, how did that work? You know, we can learn from our experience. We can say, oh, you know, that was really, even in the midst of it, sometimes we can notice the reactions that we're having. And so it's not, you know, that we now somehow have to like inoculate ourselves against suffering. We just want to pay attention. So whatever's going on, we can be with that, you know? So we consider ourselves, you know, like, I don't suffer anymore because I've, you know, learned that I don't have to identify, et cetera, et cetera. And then I catch myself suffering about something, you know? I don't have to beat myself up. Oh God, that's terrible. You know, it's funny because I just contradicted myself. Even if I beat myself up, it's like wherever in the process that I can catch myself and come back to the present, that's the opportunity to learn. So we don't ever have to avoid anything or pretend that now this is you know, we're going to talk for this presence posse about how to not suffer, you know?
Yep. Everything is an opportunity to learn something as far as I'm concerned. And at any point in any process, as you say, I tend to, when I work with clients, I will very often remind them that it's possible to look at pain as a gift. And if you look at pain as a gift, although it's not easy necessarily to be in the pain, and that's actually a muscle that can be trained as well, how much we can tolerate of discomfort. In my experience, it's what's the gift in this? How do I grow from this? What do I see in myself? What resources in myself can I find, or even around me?
Right.
I saw you raise your hand, Bobby.
Yeah. I just wanted to do like a construction using your two examples of how we take what could be painful, because certainly, especially your arm in the bus, that could have been a painful experience. And, you know, it could have taken a day or two to get your arm back right again. But that would just be pain. That wouldn't necessarily be suffering. You could be laughing as you told the funny story about how the bus driver very nearly ripped your arm off. And so there could be pain without suffering. But if we wanted to add suffering to the mix, the way that people typically do that is keep that story alive, continually repeating it. Right. Somebody says, man, what's going on, Miriam? You seem a little bit off today. Yeah, I'm off. You know, the damn bus driver nearly ripped my arm off the road. And, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, that, or the other thing. I don't know how I'm going to function. And you begin to associate an experience which, as Fred pointed out, is neither inherently good nor bad, just an experience. You have that experience. But we now begin to not only identify with that experience, add it to the mix of who we are and how we're doing in this bouillabaisse that we're constantly creating, but we're also keeping the story alive by telling everybody that it comes across. Whereas in your experience, when the lady says, "How's your arm doing?" it's kind of like, what?
What?
You know, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, it's fine. And so it's not something that we never want to tamp those feelings down as they arise. There's a neat little poem: "What we resist will persist. What we think and feel we make real. What we befriend we can transcend." And so it's just, that first part of it is, if anger is arising or sadness is arising and we're trying to tamp it down, it's like trying to keep a volleyball or a soccer ball underneath the water of the pool. We can do it for a while, but sooner or later we're going to let go and the ball's going to pop right back up again.
In the most inconvenient ways.
Yeah. Can very
And
often. I love that analogy. Sorry, Danielle, what did you say?
And times.
And times, yeah. I mean, it's the same with the ball. That is such a good. I'm going to steal that if you don't mind. Now you've actually given it to
go
everyone.
ahead.
Holding the ball down and then letting it go. It doesn't always go straight up. It can go off and then smack somebody else, which can be rather painful. But if you don't mind, I'd like to, and even if you do, I would like to just mention something about that's whole sort of keeping the thing alive. I think part of suffering, or at least if I look at myself before I realized that I was the one who was creating my life and my experiences and that sort of thing, I could blame the bus driver for being a crappy bus driver and not paying attention and all of that. Anytime anything happened, or in the case of the Visa card, it wasn't in my wallet. Well, I must be an idiot, stupid fool. How could you, misplace your Visa card? That's a really idiotic thing to do. Where I assign blame or criticism or judgment on something or someone, and then I make the assumption simultaneously that it's true. So I decide that the bus driver is an idiot, and I decide that I'm right. It's true, what I think. And then I can keep that going for the rest of my life. Or about myself, I can tell myself I'm an idiot. How stupid could I possibly be? And I can beat myself up for 30 more years about it because I can. I assume that it's true. As you say, it becomes an identity. I make it about myself. And all of that has to do with unrealistic expectations. It's like I expect the bus driver to not make mistakes. I expect myself to not make mistakes. I expect everybody else to not make mistakes. I expect people to know what I want, when I want it, how I want it.
Without telling them.
Beg pardon?
Without telling them.
Right, exactly. And be telepathic. So then I am creating my own problems in my own life, not realizing necessarily until somebody might point it out to me that is exactly what I'm doing, because I want to believe, or at least the way I was before, I wanted to believe it was everybody else's fault. And that way I never had to take responsibility for my own actions. Whereas now it just does not serve me the majority of time. Yes, no, I'm not God. So I do make mistakes. I do need to keep learning where I'm, assigning blame where it's actually my responsibility. But generally speaking, I do know it's me. It's pretty much all me. And I have a choice to make at any time. It doesn't mean I don't feel pain. It just means I decide whether I create more of it or not, how long I stay in it, what I do with it. If I've gone into pain, I have a choice.
And we're all doing the best we can.
Yes.
With the resources that we have access to.
The resources that we have, et cetera, et cetera. The bus driver was doing the best he could in that moment, being distracted by, the little old lady crossing the road and the kid behind him chewing his gum too loudly and whatever else was happening. The lady that commented after the bus, as you were leaving, was seeing life through her lens, and she's doing the best that she can.
Yeah.
You know, there's no point in which we're not doing the best we can.
And I'm wondering if we can actually take it a step further and not just focus on unrealistic expectations. And although we do, there's no doubt that we're very good at coming up with unrealistic expectations if we desire to do so, but just expectations in general. I mean, if you start to make your way through the world with little attachment or clinging to specific outcomes, not to say that you're not going to have preferences, but if your preference doesn't unfold, you know, can you just have a curiosity around, okay, wow, wasn't expecting that, and work off of that. You know, I like to play chess, and I'll think of a chess move or two. I'm not super good at it, so I'm not thinking 7 or 8 moves ahead, but I think a couple of moves ahead. And very often the move that I think my opponent is going to make is not what they're going to do. And it's like, okay, well, I had my next 5 moves planned out if they did that, but they didn't. So now what? And just keep, you know, a sense of presence and an open-mindedness to the concept. I have a precept that life unfolds only one way, divinely. And I don't know whether that's true or not. But it is useful, because I find that when I begin to get frustrated or angry or anxious, almost always as I pull on that emotion, I notice, oh, I wanted something else to happen. I didn't want that to unfold, but oh, well, that's the way life is unfolding. So now what? And I just find it useful to bring myself back out of time traveling into the future, thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead, bringing myself back to the present and say, this is what's happening now. So now what?
Danielle?
So yeah, I think that brings up the aspect of control. And when you were talking about your experience on the bus and the person making the comment, she observed it. And in my experience, it's very difficult to observe someone else's pain and not have any control over it. Like, it's almost more difficult to get out of that suffering than it is to get out of your own suffering, when you feel like you knew what to do, how to react, how to get the help that you needed. You did it, you got it, and it was good. You were done, right? But she saw something that she couldn't do anything about. And so it caused her some suffering in that moment. And the same thing, like if Bobby could control the opponent, he would know what to do next, right? But we don't have control, and that is not something that we're very often taught. We're taught that we should be able to control outcomes. And why are we taught that, right? Like, we control the effort we put in, the direction we're going, and the rest of it is not up to us. And if we had been taught that earlier on in life, perhaps there would be less suffering, because we wouldn't have that illusion that we have control over things. As a parent, you pretty much find that out, even if it's a dog parent, right? Or a horse parent or whatever. You can train certain behaviors, you can do some things, but ultimately that's an individual consciousness that you don't get to control. You only get to control yours. And that speaks to the comment here too. It's so painful to make everyone else at fault. It's much easier if you keep your own responsibility, because you keep your own power. If you make it somebody else's responsibility, you have given them power over you.
So, I want to illustrate that there's a paradox here. If we are as we're going to really attempt to look at this, both from the worldly and the spiritual perspective, they appear to be in conflict. Jesus said to be in the world, but not of the world. So it's not like we can give up the entire idea of being in control. because from the relative world, in the world perspective, I want to know that when I flip that switch, the lights are going to turn on. I don't want it to be a mystery every moment of my life. Miriam would like to know that when she waits at a certain bus stop, that bus does show up, and that 99% of the time it's not going to catch her arm in the door. That's reality. We do have expectations that life is supposed to work a certain way, and it would be very difficult to live in the world where I didn't have certain expectations, about just the basics of how my life worked. So the paradox is that we can live in this world and deal with the laws. I always tell, when I do workshops or work with clients and we go into some very deep, profound place of not being identified so much with the physical world, we begin to move towards that spiritual reality. I always remind them, still stop at stop signs on your way home, still the laws of physics will continue to apply after you leave here. So there is that paradox. So, the game as I see it is to explore the edges of where we can let go of control, to explore the edges of where I hold an attachment to an expectation or how I think the world should be, to notice when I suffer, I have a reaction when the world doesn't happen the way I expect it to. And those are the experiences where that's where I can transcend, And if I can sit in that moment with the experience in my body, the pain, the suffering, the tension, there's something that opens in that space. There's something that you can see it's fundamentally not as real as I thought it was. Mm-hmm. And it's a phenomenal thing to literally transcend it, not just mentally, change my opinion about it, but to literally go through it and see it for what it is just, an amazing experience. And it teaches us a little bit more about who we really are, that this little ego identity is the part that gets attached, that gets pissed off when the bus is late or whatever. But that's not who we are. So the moment we can transcend that, because that's really what we're transcending, we're not transcending the suffering, we're transcending the identity that believes in that suffering, that is attached to that experience. So that's why, life either happens to us or for us, right? If it happens for us, the suffering is just one more opportunity to see who we really are.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought up that word opportunity, because I was thinking it the whole time. It is such an opportunity. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I have anything else to ask. Anybody want to bring up anything?
I saw kind of building on what Fred said. I don't know that I'll get this quote exactly right. In fact, you know what? Actually, let me just look it up. So if somebody else wants to grab it, let me look up this quote here real quick so that I do get it right, because it perfectly dovetails into what we're saying.
Cool.
I want to bring up something. I feel like there is a big difference between disassociation and transcendence. And I think that might be a common misunderstanding of transcendence, right? Like we're just going to step apart from it, away from it. And that disassociation is very different than being the observer of the human experience from that being. It's not leaving the body, it's being in the body and experiencing that without being drawn into it, identified with it, but also not just checking out.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing, I must be in a very compassionate mood today. So even that, like the dissociation might be the best solution that we have in the moment.
Absolutely is, especially in children.
Yeah, right. So if we have the ability to do it, like if it's somehow wired into us, then there must be some purpose for it in some way. But of course, if it becomes habitual, Now, every time something happens, I just check out. Well, that's probably not that useful anymore. But, maybe something happened that's just so overwhelming and I don't have the resources for it. And I don't have the ability in that moment to say, let me just observe this. Let me just be with it. So maybe checking out is my best option until such time as I have the resources.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that at all. But I do feel like at some point you will find that it still has to be integrated
I agree.
and work through, and then you won't suffer with it. Once you've disassociated, you still kind of have that and are suffering with it until you're able to reintegrate it.
There's no resolution in dissociation.
Right. Exactly. There's no solution there. There is a survival.
Right.
And so absolutely, at that level, it has a function, just like the fight or flight mechanism of our brain and body has a function to keep us alive. We don't want to live there because then we end up really stressed out all the time, right? We want to be able to get into that rest, repose, neurological functioning, biological functioning that allows us to heal and recover.
Yeah, but sometimes guidance can be just taking a pause and stepping back and sitting with something. Everyone has had the experience of an aha moment where you're sitting there just like focused on a problem and trying to wrap your mind around it and trying to really understand it. And then you just get frustrated and stuck. So you get up and you go walk your dog or take a shower or do the dishes or stir the soup or whatever. And all of a sudden that flash of insight comes in. So the guidance to say, step away from this, just let it sit for a little while. In that, you're creating the space for the insight to happen, and you're creating the space for the integration to eventually happen. And I found my quote.
Can I just say something before you go to the quote, since we went over to dissociation? Because it's quite normal in therapy to have people come who have challenges with dissociation. And dissociation, I guess, in some ways can be viewed as a kind of an avoidance tactic for something that is, if it's something that is overwhelming, experience is overwhelming, I avoid experiencing overwhelm. It's just a matter of what people can handle and what they can't.
Right.
And I found that very often the opposite of dissociation, or what eases dissociation, is curiosity, cultivating curiosity. Is there anything about this you find interesting? Or is there anything about this that makes you happy? Or anything about this you find particularly frightening? Anything, just getting the curiosity going, that can help people come back. Because there are a lot of people out there who have had so horrifying experiences. I mean, there's sexual abuse, they don't even want to know they have bodies, a lot of them, right? So being outside of their body is much more comfortable and much safer, seems to them, until they slowly understand that it's not the body that's the problem, right? So I just wanted to bring that in. It's sort of allowing for an opening for the possibility of curiosity.
If I could add one more thing, and Bobby, hold on to that quote.
We are getting to the quote, yeah.
Just because I don't want to break this thread that we're on. And I love the idea of asking someone, what can you find that's interesting, or however you put it. Because in a way, what I hear that you're doing is you're introducing people to their own resourcefulness, which if you don't even want to, I think that's a very honest statement. Some people don't even want to believe that they have a body. I mean, they intellectually know it, but they want to be so disconnected from it because they're so afraid of what they'll find in there. So to give people like this access that they do have resources and that they can become resourceful little by little, courage is a resource, and resilience and all these things that we can find in ourselves and that we can grow in ourselves once we start to look, once we believe that there's actually a way through this, as opposed to just having to stay in defense of it the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Okay, Bobby, go for it.
So here's the quote. I believe this is Byron Katie, but I'm not 100% sure. But the quote is, "Life is simple. Everything happens for you, not to you. Exactly what Fred just said. Everything happens at exactly the right moment, neither too soon nor too late. You don't have to like it. Life is just easier if you do.
That does sound like Baron Katie.
It kind of, it's another thing of bringing us back to the power of presence in integrating and resolving and seeing the source of where all of this suffering comes from.
And how would you describe that source?
How would I describe it?
Yeah.
Ask the question again a little bit more completely so I know exactly what I'm answering.
You referenced the source of suffering. I think that's how you said it. And so I was just curious how you define the source of suffering.
I define the source of suffering as becoming attached or clinging to the way that we would like things to unfold. And I have a theory and a precept that our suffering, here's the way life is unfolding, here's the way that we would like life to be unfolding. And to the degree that we become overly attached to the belief that our happiness or our peace or our tranquility is located into life happening this way, the delta between these two are where all of the suffering is located. And it's okay to wish something would happen in a certain way, but the realization, my little dog, who's the sweetest dog I've ever adopted, and I've adopted a lot in my lifetime, is a little over a year old and has had 5 homes before me. And how in the world she managed to be given up by 4 people prior to getting here is a frigging mystery, which, as I've told that story, people are like, how in the world could that happen? That dog is so sweet. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just glad that it did, because
it wasn't their dog.
That led her to me. And, she happened to show up right about the time that I was over the pain of putting Daisy down. And, suddenly the idea, hey, it might be nice to adopt a nice little puppy. And then she showed up, and it seemed divine. And when we're focused on if this could only be, if my boss wasn't a jerk, if I had more money, if I had the right car, if I had 6-pack abs, if I was in a better relationship, then I would be happy.
Right.
As opposed to, here's where I am right now, and this is it. Like Miriam, hey, I'm in a bus and it's pulling me down the road, and she could either throw a tantrum or she could say, help. And that's the way life unfolded. So that's my definition.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's something to do with putting conditions, like where I hear you talking about this delta and this putting conditions on life, or putting conditions on what life has to be in order for me to be happy. I think a lot of us are brought up that way, or believing that is the case. Like, if I just get the better job, if I just get the right education, if I just marry the perfect person, if I just get the right puppy or whatever, then my life is wonderful. And if none of that happens, or if not all of that happens, then I'm miserable. Without realizing that none of it has to happen. It's nice if it does. But the misery comes from the conditions that we put on things and the limitations. I'd just like to qualify one thing also, because I work a lot, of course, as I've mentioned, with relations. Where not necessarily both people are in the room. One will come and talk about the relationship. But we're always in relation to something, in relation to the amount of money, the car, whatever, the children, ourselves. There's always a relation in there. So there's a difference between the kind of suffering where I'm in a relationship with a person who beats me physically, and I'm in a relationship where I feel I suffer as a psychological situation. Not that I'm being physically beaten, because in generally speaking, if I meet someone who's being physically beaten at home, my first thought would be get yourself to safety first, and then we'll deal with the rest. We'll deal as much as we can now, but get yourself to safety first. So when I'm talking about transcending suffering here, I'm not talking about the physical beatings that people sometimes take from parents, siblings, animals, partners, whatever. So I do hear a lot of that. Again, if I have the perfect partner, all of the romantic ideas that we're presented with in films about, and every Christmas, it's the same every Christmas. There's always that sort of, they start out and they don't like each other, or there's some crisis in town or whatever. And then they fall in love and they live happily ever after. And then everybody has a wonderful Christmas. The kids come home, everybody moves back into town, and then the parents are happy. There's always something like that that gives the impression that that's what happiness is, and that's what not suffering is. And basically here we're talking about, that isn't what transcending suffering is about. It's getting all of your wishes met and having all of your conditions met. We are people, and we deal with people, generally speaking, on a daily basis. And we don't always have any control over what kind of people we deal with. My boss does not have to be a very enlightened person. My boss can be a real, what people might call a jerk, or not treat me very well anyway. And then I have a choice to stay there and deal with whatever I'm doing with that situation, whatever kind of labels I'm putting on, challenging judgments, assumptions, whatever, or look at what I'm doing and then transcend that, meaning meeting it, as we've talked about here. So I just wanted to add that dimension, is we're not talking about when you are in a situation where you're in physical danger or a threat of physical danger. It's not physical pain. Although transcending suffering with regard to physical pain is absolutely possible. I've experienced that a lot of times, where I was in a very painful procedure with no anesthetic or painkiller or anything, and realized that I could actually do something about that. And then the pain stopped. This procedure was still going, but I no longer felt pain. We're not going to necessarily get into that here. We don't really have time for it, but I just wanted to bring that aspect in.
Yeah, pain is remarkable that way, and that may be presence in pain or something is another topic. I just wanted to, in maybe just a few minutes, we've talked a lot about suffering, but really let's talk about what happiness actually is, or at least a different perspective on happiness. So my perspective on that is that happiness is intrinsic. It's not something that we have to achieve. It's not something that suddenly we earn or that can finally happen because life has organized itself in a certain way for us. It's just the natural experience of coming back to who we really are. And this journey from identification with ego and the being caught up in that identity that we create, moving down until we become more and more identified with what I would call our true nature, our true self. I think we all have different names for the same thing. Is the journey towards recognizing that happiness is just part of who we already are. You've always had the ability to go home, Dorothy. It's not something that is some special ability, and I just want to make sure we put that in there, that while we talk about how you don't have to avoid suffering and all this kind of stuff, that there actually is something behind that suffering that's worth exploring. And sometimes it takes some help to get there, of course, which is why we're here, but it's a worthwhile journey.
I'm just going to throw out the reference there for those of you who might not have recognized. It's the Wizard of Oz. It's Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. At the end, she's told that she's always had the ability.
Just click those little shoes together.
Yeah, your red slippers. Yes.
Yeah. I've got a client who has been looking for a particular Jeep for a while, and he finally found it. And so now he's very upbeat, and it's like a week or 10 days old, the purchase. So it's relatively new, And I've talked to him a couple of times since he's bought it, and I'm like, "How you doing?" And he's like, "I'm still on this Jeep high, man." And in the moment, the Jeep has brought him an enormous amount of happiness. And when we have these conversations with clients, we often get, "Are you saying if I got the right job, or if I got the six-pack abs, that wouldn't make me happy?" And no, I'm not saying that at all. And that's an example of kind of going to the opposite extremes. What I would suggest with my friend with the Jeep is the reason that he's happy now is, momentarily at least, he's called off the search. His happiness was wrapped around the accumulation of this new toy, the acquisition of this new toy. And now that he's gotten it, momentarily he's just kind of sitting there taking it all in. And what Fred referenced, that it's inherent, it's innate. Happiness is who we are, and it's all these constructs and limiting beliefs and conditioning. The conditioning that happens. I mean, Madison Avenue and the traditional self-help community is all about you plus whatever it is that I'm selling, which could include the 8 essential keys or the 7 magical steps of a lot of self-help, equals you 2.0, finally the happy you. So the conditioning, the conditioning is ubiquitous.
Mm-hmm.
It's everywhere we look.
Wonderful. And I do recall also, Fred, you've mentioned something about that, as well as like the soccer players, I think it was, you talked about when they score, they're really, really happy because now they're not hunting anymore. They're not trying hard, they're actually seeking. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to add something in there because, again, they're on the relationship side, because a lot of people do look for their partner. They look for their, I don't want to say perfect match, but sometimes they think like that, a perfect match, but even a good match. And when we talk about, or if I speak for myself, when I talk about transcending suffering, I'm not talking about just having whoever as a partner, and if I feel pain, it's all me, putting some sort of judgment on and all of that. That's not what I'm talking about. There are people who are better suited to be together with other people. There are some people, we just flow better. There are also some relationships where we grow more. They're more challenging and we have an opportunity to grow more. So when I talk about transcending suffering, I'm not talking about accepting any old person as a life partner just because I can transcend. I don't have to feel the pain. I don't have to feel discomfort and all of that. It might not be a good match for me for whatever reason. And then I actually need to look at that. What is happening? Am I putting something in here? Or is there something that is not here that is actually something I need to fulfill my journey in life, to be my innate self, to be in this world as me? And I mean, I could get into the big conversation about self at all and all of that, but we don't really have time. And we've done that in previous posses, and we'll come back to it again, of course. I just wanted to mention that it doesn't mean you accept everything. That's not what it's about at all.
Agreed.
Thank you. Danielle didn't protest, so I'm going to assume you're smiling. So I'm just kind of like, okay.
Silence is your consent, Danielle.
Yeah. Be a follower.
I'm not sure.
Well, there's a thread through this of setting conditions for our happiness and setting conditions for our perfect relationship and finding that in the Hallmark movie and, all of those things that contribute to us not feeling okay here where life is actually happening. And removing that conditioning allows us to come back to what actually would we love?
Mm-hmm.
What would we enjoy? What would make us free to experience the happiness that is innate? And I think the unlearning is often the most difficult part of the expanding journey, right? It's not, expanding's not as difficult, but getting all the other stuff out of there so that there's room for something new to come in and expand. That's the, well, and maybe it's just because we've been at life a little bit longer. I'll speak for myself. I had several decades of conditioning before I started unconditioning, right? And I started to learn some of these things were actual truths. And I actually found one of the most difficult things to be for me, and who knows why, doesn't matter, is to put myself first so that I have something to give back, right? Like if I am able to experience happiness, I can share happiness. I'm not going to get it from outside, but I have a lot. Yeah, that was the most difficult unlearning for me, is that I get to come first. I should come first, and then I have something to give. If I don't do it that way, then I'm just constantly depleting myself and suffering.
Beautiful.
Life is what happens while we're busy making other plans.
Other plans.
John Lennon.
I don't make other plans. I just get stuck in buses.
Just stay
was
present
not
to the
planned.
plan.
No way I could have planned that. Well, lady and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our hour. So I would like to thank you all once again for a Posse talk that I hope has been helpful for the people who have participated and will watch later when we publish the video. And thank you all for generously sharing your expertise and your experiences. And anyone who's watching, thank you for being here and sharing your comments and questions with us. And please feel free to contact any one of us. If you've heard something you liked, if you'd like to speak more with us, you're more than welcome to contact any of us. Our contact information is in the Facebook group called the Presence Posse, as we are called the Presence Posse. Next week's topic is mindful communication, presence and communication. There's a hot topic. So we welcome you again next Monday, same time, same place. Thanks, everybody.